Hello and welcome to episode 3.2, the September 27th, 2023 Pumpkin Spice edition of Notes from the Aisle Seat, the podcast that covers the arts in northern Chautauqua County, sponsored by the 1891 Fredonia Opera House. My name is Tom Laughlin, and I'm your host as we bring you news and information about arts events at the Opera House and around the region, including interviews with artists and creators across the county. Well, the autumnal equinox has come and gone, and we're already into the fall season. I've begun to notice leaves changing up in the hills, and it seems like election signs have begun sprouting everywhere. It's pumpkin spice time, and while I am not a fan of pumpkin spice anything, the season itself is always welcome. The days remain pleasantly warm, while the nights cool off nicely for sleeping. I haven't been able to enjoy the season yet as I've been under the weather over the past 2 weeks. So I apologize in advance if you hear a little labored breathing or extraneous coughing or throat clearing at some points in these interviews. It takes a little bit longer now to recover from illnesses and injuries, but we're on the mend and looking forward to October's splendor. And speaking of splendor, the Ellis Rowley House on Route 60 was one of the many splendid houses that lined the route around Laona. The house has been razed, but much of its splendor has been captured by local historian and genealogist Gail Pugh Dash. She will be giving a Chautauqua history lecture presentation on Thursday, October 12th at 7 p.m., and I had a chance to get a preview of the lecture in this conversation. I'm pleased to be able to have as my guest at this time Ms. Gail Pugh Dash. Gail is going to be giving one of our Chautauqua County history lectures on Thursday, October 12th at 7 p.m. over at the 1891 Fredonia Opera House. And I'll let her introduce the title and all of that kind of stuff. But Gail, first of all, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you.
Thank you for inviting me. This is rather exciting.
That's good. I'm glad. I'm glad you're excited. I do love these local history things that I do for, for the county and so on and so forth. And you, I've discovered, of course, are very active in this kind of thing. You are the past president and also the current vice president and program director for the Chautauqua County Genealogical Society. Can you just give me a background about your own personal interest, first of all, in genealogy and local history?
Well, the families came over on the Mayflower. I have 2 aunts that were hung at the Salem witch trials, and I have a strong sense of family and history, and have been looking into it more and more. I ran into a cousin I didn't know I had about 10, 12 years ago, and she is the town of Arkwright historian. And when I was trying to show her some old pictures I had been running through because my family came into Chautauqua County in the early 1800s, a couple of the different families. And I was showing her pictures, and she looked at me and she said, "You're my cousin." So right now we're best friends. That's Ruth Nichols. So it really started from there. And she was in the Genealogical Society already, and so she invited me to come to some meetings, and then I get started, and then I become an officer, and etc. So it's a very great program. And then the Daughters of 1812 and Daughters of the Revolution are within the past 8 to 10 years also. 3 years only for the Daughters of 1812. We have a charter group that I helped establish 3 years ago. So for the local area.
Yeah, that's great. I did notice I went to the Chautauqua County Genealogical Society does have a website, and I went there, and it's been around for almost 40 years, if not more,
Yes.
right?
Yes, it has been. I wasn't involved with it then, but it keeps going, and we have some great people manning the computers and putting in information and doing a lot of historical research.
And it's open to the public, right? I also want to put
The
that out there.
Genealogical Society, all of our meetings and speaker programs are open to the public. We do have a paid membership. I think it's $20 a year, which gets you the newsletter, etc. So that's about all the fee there is, but we always welcome anyone to come to our meeting.
Well, let's get into the lecture that you're going to present at the Opera House, and it's entitled, I believe, "Gleanings from the Rowley Ellis Home in Laona." And I think that word "gleanings" is kind of very interesting. Can you elaborate on that a little bit for us?
Well, yes, it is. As soon as I started looking at items in the home, and I'll go back to that, I thought this, over a period of time, I was getting things out of this house. And I'm thinking, I would like to do this for the 1891 Opera House. And I was talking to Wayne Leamer, who does our newsletter, et cetera, for the Genealogical Society. And he came up, we were tossing words around, and he came up with Gleanings. So I have to give him credit for that. But the Ellis house, I didn't know much about it. Had passed it almost every day down at the bottom of Route 60 in Laona. I live in Casadega now, grew up in Dunkirk, raised children in Silver Creek. But the house was always a treasure to look at, and the beautiful home next to it, owned by Sandy and Kevin Beneski, they'd always have fabulous yard sales. And so over the past several years, I've stopped at the yard sales. We'll talk to Kevin. Kevin is a gleaner. He goes into the estates, et cetera, around the area, and he'd bring things out that he had, and they were kind of sister houses and sister families at the same period of time. Both were owned by Ellis's. And he started giving me stuff so I would find a home for them. And so there's some different projects. He knew with my connections to the Genealogical Society and the other daughters that it was something that I was not keeping. It was something I was going to be passing on and donating, and talking with him.
So when the house, I know that the last inhabitant of the house passed away, and that's when they decided to raise the house. The house is not there anymore, and like you, I've passed it, I don't know, thousands of times, I'm sure,
Yes.
and in my travels across the county. The decision was made to raise the house. Was it in as bad shape as you think to be raised?
Yes, it really, unfortunately, it really was. And early in 22, in the summer, Kevin had a yard sale, and he gave me some business ledgers from the local Laona corners and the Ellis family involved, and the Rowley family and the Ramsdell family. And he gave me these ledgers. The oldest one is from 1856, beautifully written. And that's older.
Oh, wow. I'm looking at a picture of it now. I'm looking at the book itself, and it's really quite the.
That's the book.
Yes,
and
quite.
It's hefty. It's in beautiful script writing, and Wayne has scanned it completely. One of our other members, Debbie Kotar, has indexed it for us.
Wow.
There's about 4 other ones that we haven't bothered to do that with. Then early on, so then I stopped again at another yard sale a summer ago. And Kevin said, the house is going to have to be raised. Would you like to go in? And I thought, yes. So he took me in the very high ceilings, 3 stories, full attic. I had taken a bunch of pictures. And then I stopped again later on. He gave me a couple of plates out of it. It was in the process of having been almost everything taken out that the family wanted. And at the moment, I hadn't known that Dave Rowley grew up in that house from WDOE.
That's I was just going to ask you that question because I noticed the name. I was going to ask you a little bit about the families, and I said, Dave, is that Dave Rowley's house? Is that really?
Was Dave Rowley's house. And
okay.
He was in it until he was an adult, and I do have that information. Then he had moved out, and his brother Jim was still in the home. And so then I got more interested, and Kevin said they pretty well have cleaned out everything they want. And they had some contractors coming in, local antique dealers, and a carpenter came in, a refurnishing person, and took out mantles, started taking out mantles and woodwork and things like that to salvage. Or just make, some of it was sold, some of it was, just take what you want. Kevin said, go in and take what you want. I said, well, I would be looking for, obviously, what was the documents, historical items, anything that connects to anything else. I made 4 trips in, I think it was, by myself. And the attic was really pretty tricky. And there are pictures, so I will be having pictures in the slide presentation. I have also talked with Dave Rowley. He's been over here to my house. He lives 1 block over from me here in Casadega. His wife came over. Because of the delicate nature of the house being in such ill repair, and his brother still living in the home at that time, he had passed by the time I was in it, of course. I wanted to make sure I was doing things correctly. And David's kind of given me a carte blanche on this and said, looks good. And now they're sending me more pictures to use. They had some generational pictures and different phases of the house. And it was a real joy, to be working on this, because it's not a genealogical society presentation, although that will be discussed so people can know who, what, when, where, why, and how on the items. It's more on the items and the person connected to the item that I took out. And there's going to be a brief history on the history of the home itself and the family itself. I got a hold of Todd Langworthy when I did Comfort Town historian and Fredonia historian. Got a hold of Max Walters at Barker. We had a meeting with a few of the ledgers that I had gotten, and that was close to a year ago. Well, it was like early last spring, I think. And we kind of talked about what we were going to do, because the items are all going to be going to the Barker Museum once I'm done.
So let me ask you about, I was going to ask you about the Rowley family, but we're pretty clear on Dave and his brother Jim occupying that particular house all their lives. But what about the other side, the Ellis family? How are they connected to that house?
The Rowley girl, the Ellis girl married the Rowley. So that's what the generation is. Because actually Dave's middle name is Ellis, after his mom's family.
Okay.
And his brother Jim's middle name is Ellis, after the Ellis family. And so it goes back to the beginning. So there has been continuous Ellis blood living in that house since it was built. And I can't remember the exact year, but so it was kind of an end of an era. And the exciting things in the house were the ledgers at first, and then the other that I was given, and not for me, but to pass, to find them a home. And the Bibles from a niece of, would have been an aunt of David and Jim's. So they're kind of exciting.
Can you perhaps just give me maybe 1 or 2 either specific items in the ledger or specific artifacts or something that when you look at them, you just simply found them absolutely fascinating or unique or interesting?
But the interesting thing is, there has been so much history, documentation and genealogy documentation in Chautauqua County. We have some great people who have been doing it for years. Opening the first couple page of that main ledger from the Ramsdell family, which was related in with the Ellis family. Very prominent names. A. Straight, who helped found the Lilydale movement a little bit. Oh gosh, I cannot remember her name off the top of my head, but she was very involved with Lilydale. Their names are in there. What they bought, what the date is that they bought it, and how much it cost back in the day. So that's rather exciting. The other thing is with the Sylvia Parcell. Her sister was Ellis. And she was a missionary in the Congo, even during World War II.
Oh,
And yeah, 26 years in the Congo, Maduda. I found that information online that she was in Maduda in
wow.
the Congo. She was quite a prolific speaker around the country and lived in Southampton. And even in her Bible, it gives the times in the 20s and 30s that she was in the Congo or on furlough, and back in the Congo and on furlough. And then the writings in her Bible that she hand wrote in pencil that I have completely copied by hand myself at this point in time. And wondering, and I'm going to pull this together, some of the items I'm going to pull together as far as what was going on in the world, what was going on in the country when certain events in the Ellis family's lives were happening. And I can imagine a young gal from the Chautauqua County area who was born here in Chautauqua County going to the Congo across the ocean during the turmoil of the time and, being there in 42, 43, 44. Yeah.
Yeah, that thought is. One last question before I go. Who's been assisting you? You probably have some people who have participated and helped you out along the way in getting some of this information.
Basically, getting the information and doing the stuff here at the house, no. But giving it to Wayne Leamer with the Genealogical Society, he's been doing all the scanning. And as I said, Debbie Kotar, yes. And just the fact that, Kevin and Dave's family were just so gracious as far as getting as much information to me and getting me more information. I now have pictures of when the wrecking ball was there. I couldn't go myself. And Dave actually wasn't there for it either. And pictures of the inside of the house because I had taken pictures of myself sitting on this little tiny step ladder that went up to the third floor attic. And I have three pictures left of that. So they supplied some more pictures from the inside. But they went back and forth as to whether to have to tear it down or not tear it down and cost effective and everything. So, But the nice thing is that the back part of the back wall, stone part of the wall is still there. They left that out.
Well, that's good. That's good to hear. Well, listen, Gail, thank you very much, first of all, for coming on the podcast, and also thank you for doing this work for the Genealogical Society and also for the history of the county. I know that all of you historians and researchers and people who are interested in, county history do it as a labor of love, and it's really appreciated, I think, by people who get a chance to hear it. And I think people who will come to this lecture will understand how much they can appreciate this kind of local history. So thank you for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Okay. We'll see you at the lecture, Gail. Take care.
Wonderful. Thank you. Bye.
Gleanings from the Ellis Rowley Home in Laona will be presented at the 1891 Fredonia Opera House on Thursday, October 12th, beginning at 7 p.m. Admission is free. Donations are always gratefully accepted.
When I was 17, I thought I'd live forever and chase down every dream and make them all come true in time. But by the time I hit 25, I could see life was gonna be hard work, busting my back from 8 to 5. I played my music on the side.
You might say that Doug DeJoe is one of those local boy made good stories, but Doug will tell you he's just one lucky guy. A singer-songwriter who spent time as a Nashville songwriter before striking out on his own, Doug will be coming to the 1891 Fredonia Opera House on Friday, October 13th at 7:30 p.m. as part of the Folk in Fredonia Gilman Family Music Series. I had a pretty laid-back conversation with him from his home in Gig Harbor, Washington, outside of Seattle. I think this is going to be an excellent interview, and I think you guys, the listeners out there, are going to enjoy my next interviewee. He is Doug DeJoe. He is coming to the Fredonia Opera House with his particular interesting brand of music on Friday, October 13th at 7:30 p.m., and he's one of the most affable and amiable guys I've ever talked to so far. So, Doug, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you very much, Tom. I've been called other A words too, so amiable and affable. I'm thrilled about that.
Okay, that's good. We'll leave the third one out for now.
Okay.
So let's start off with probably the single most interesting thing about you, and that's you're a Fredonia hometown guy, and you really make that a point. You put that in your bio on your website that you call Fredonia the best little small town in America. I mean, you go that far. What is it that just in your upbringing, memories of Fredonia? What makes you consistently say that and let people know that?
I was really lucky, man. I was one of those kids. I'm an adopted kid, so my parents, yanked me out of an orphanage in Buffalo, New York in 1961. So I came to Fredonia probably differently than most. And, ever since I was a little kid, I was just treated with love, and I grew up in the Italian section over there, Eagle, Cushing, Orchard, Cleveland, and it was just a knot of, dozens post-World War II baby boomer kids just running around. We had baseball games, man, every day, and we would have like 6, 7, 8 kids on a team. So we had a ghost man in right, and we always had enough baseball games, football games, basketball games. We just had a ball, and my dad taught me how to play ball, so I had some success in high school and stuff, and I don't know, man, it was just... love just exuded from every place I went.
Yeah, that's a pretty genuine sentiment there, I have to say. And I did my research on you, and I looked you up, and you're a little modest about your baseball career. You are a member of the SUNY Fredonia. You're a member of the SUNY Fredonia Sport Hall of Fame for your baseball career, 2 years from 80 to 82. That's true. I believe that your 82 team won SUNY's first ECAC title.
That's right. You're very good, Tom. Wow. I feel like I'm talking to Walter Cronkite here. But it was an enjoyable career, and in fact, I've got a song that I'm playing on the 13th, and it's called The Old Ball Club. And,
oh, good.
It starts out, didn't have no big coach bus, no drivers to drive us, just 240 kind of line vans. Took turns driving to home games, took the field and were called names. It didn't matter because we were our own biggest fans. And, so I tried to cram as many names as I could of players from 80 to 82. And I think I got 12 names in there.
Wow.
But I'm looking forward to playing that for the boys, the Old Ball Club.
Well, that's good. That's a good sequence to get into your music because I know I don't think anybody's coming to the Opera House to watch you pitch. I think they're coming to hear you
Yeah,
play. So,
right.
so let's talk a little bit about your music, your musical style and stuff. Now, you left the area obviously to go down to Nashville and make a career for yourself, and you became pretty much a songwriter. You you got yourself a band, the Bloom Laters,
Yep.
recorded a whole lot of stuff. I'm really interested in your, how you would classify yourself in terms of musical style and some of your influences and so on and so forth.
Well, for me, there was Dylan, but he was at a whole other level. He was genius. John Prine probably had the biggest influence on me. Chris Christopherson had a big influence on me. In fact, we wrote for the same publisher, Mr. Bob Beckham. Uh, Beckham signed Christopherson in '66 when he had Combine Music, and then Beckham signed me in 1994. Um, and it was pretty cool because Christopherson would stop by whenever he was in Nashville, and it'd be later in the afternoon, and most of the guys were kind of wiped out. And Beckham would always say, with his water glass of Stolichnaya vodka, he'd say, "Chris, I'm very sorry we're all loaded." And Christopherson would always say, "I wouldn't stop by if you weren't." So Prime was my guy. But, early Buffett was really good too. Early Jimmy Buffett, 74, 75. The good stuff before that whole Parrot Head thing. He was an influence. Guy Clark was an influence. Townes Van Zandt was an influence. The Pedro and Lefty, the guy that wrote Pedro and Lefty Townes.
Hmm.
And he too was a ferocious alcoholic and died of alcohol poisoning
He
in
did, yeah.
1996.
Unfortunately, he was a genius.
He was a genius. He really was a genius. And so I love Jerry Jeff Walker too. And he was
Okay,
another
that's the second one I
guy.
picked up. See, I picked up John Prine. I picked up Jerry Jeff Walker because, anybody who talks about sings about, late night partying in bars until they can't stand up anymore. That's a Jerry Jeff Walker influence.
Working class roots, man.
Well, yeah, I notice a lot of that. I mean, a lot of your songs have all kinds of different working class roots. I wasn't sure whether that came because of your roots. I'm pretty sure it is actually, but
Yeah.
also that's the kind of thing that when you're writing songs for country artists down in Nashville is probably expected.
Yeah, that's true. You know, it changed for me when, I mean, every day you go into the publishing company and you'd have your first writing appointment at 10, and then, you know, on the days when you first start writing, you're doing two a day because you're just so excited to be there. And your second one is like 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you write to 6 or 7, and you're writing specifically for the market and sometimes for an actual act. And so you listen to all their stuff, and then you try to make these songs fit. Um, but there's a real a real containment there. First of all, you're in an 8 by 10 room with another fella, or sometimes two, and so physically you're contained, and then your ideas, and back in the day you couldn't say damn, you couldn't say hell, and you know pickup trucks and tractors, and it just got old. It just got really, really old. And so when we formed the Bloomlaters, it was really liberating. I had been in Nashville for 13 years at that point. And so when we formed the Bloomlaters, I just wrote what I wanted to write. But when you're in that writing situation for so many years, you have this filter, and everything that people say goes through a filter. Every commercial you see on TV goes through a filter, and it's that songwriter filter. So you're always unconsciously creating an idea for a song. And you followed those parameters I was there for 15 years. 13 of those were as a staff writer by that point. So those parameters are part of your fiber of being. So it was kind of cool because oftentimes the songs I wrote for myself, not even thinking of the market or an artist, would transcend. And I really started having much more luck when I just wrote from my heart, from my soul, from what was affecting me. And the training I had just transcended that commercial line because I did it for so many years. And so even these songs I'm going to do at the Opera House next month, most of these songs are really personal.
Well, I think one of the most interesting, actually, things about the way you write and the themes that you have is that you really have a real strong connection to, rural, white, blue-collar, working-class roots, but at the same time, your politics is very left-wing, and that's unusual that's an unusual combination, Doug.
Oh, man, it was tough in Nashville, man, because it was, I mean, I'd walk into the room in the morning and they'd say, "The Yankee liberals here." And, New York, concrete Dougie. And I'd say, "I'm not from New York City, man. I'm from the country." But it didn't matter. If you're from New York, people here too, in the state of Washington, if you say you're from New York, man, it's New York City, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many times you tell them.
Well, your themes are, as I say, it's unusual because when I listen to that music, I go, okay, it's country, but then I listen to the lyrics of some of your political stuff, and it's very straightforward. I mean, you do not pull punches.
No.
This ain't a title of a song called "This Ain't My America." Really lays it on the line, Doug.
Exactly. I'm glad you listened to that, Tom. Thank you.
You're welcome. I listen to
really appreciate that.
I listen to a lot of your music. I'm surprised you have as much music on your website as you do. And some of it is very touching. Like you go from something that's really very personal in terms of songs, like "He Sure Left a Lot," which I think must be about a friend of yours that you lost.
Exactly. He was a songwriter. He was a carpenter
Mm-hmm.
And a songwriter and a drunk. And as we all seem to, I don't know, it just kind of went with the territory. But that whole thing, in his Oldsmobile 88, checking out a job, he finished in East Nashville, and then going to the pool hall, and that neon buzz is a non-conforming ghost, I mean, that was just him. And he sure did leave a lot. I mean,
yeah. So you can tell you run the gamut, and sometimes it's so nice to hear some of the stories behind some of these songs. I got to tell you, it's a heck of a lot of fun. Now, I know that the people of Fredonia are probably going to be real interested to see you back on the stage and say, "Yeah, I remember that guy. He threw a hell of a knuckle curve."
Yeah, right, exactly. And now I'm a crier now, I mean, all those years of competing in sports, and all of a sudden, you tell me a story, if it's got any bit of sentimentality in it, I'll cry like a baby. So I'm going to be on that stage, and they're going to be going, "Wow, he sure does cry a lot."
Oh, Doug, thanks a lot for the conversation.
Hey,
I
man,
really,
thank
really
you, Tom.
appreciate your
You're
time.
a gentleman and a scholar.
And we'll all be looking forward to have you coming to the Opera House and
Me
coming
too.
home.
I hope I meet you.
Well, I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try and be there because I like your
Good.
style of music, and I'm gonna be interested to see what you sound like live. So
Cool.
if I do, I'll make sure I'll come backstage, shake your hand,
Absolutely. I would love to give you a handshake and a hug. I enjoyed it. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Doug DeJoe's homecoming concert will be on Friday, October 13th, beginning at 7:30 p.m. Tickets are $20 for adults, $18 for Opera House members, and $10 for students. You can get your tickets by calling the box office at 716-679-1891 or online at www.fredopera.org.
I don't think that I could ever find a friend who's any better. I don't think I got the strength to look. These things keep jumping out at me, reminding me what he believed. It's not how far he got, but the road he took. There's those who play the game for monetary gain, but he did not. For somebody you never had, two dimes to rub together, he sure left a lot.
Here is the rather brief arts calendar for the next 2 weeks. The SUNY Fredonia Wind Ensemble will perform in the King Concert Hall at the Rockefeller Arts Center on Saturday, September 30th at 8 p.m. They will be followed by the Wind Ensemble on Tuesday, October 3rd at 8 p.m. in King Concert Hall. Both events are free. Visiting artists Yvonne Lamb, violin, and Gwendolyn Deese, percussion, will give a concert beginning at 4 p.m. in the Roush Recital Hall in Mason Hall on Saturday, September 30th. Admission is free. And that's it for the arts calendar. Remember, if you have an arts event coming up and would like to get it mentioned on the arts calendar, please send an email to operahouse@fredopera.org or call the box office at 716-679-1891 with your information. The Marion Art Gallery opened a provocative exhibit entitled Not Gay on August 29th, and it runs until November 12th. The exhibit features digital photographic portraits of transgendered individuals as an exploration of the trans experience. I spoke with Dr. Jonathan Katz, one of the co-curators of the exhibit and the leading figure in queer art history. Listeners should be advised that this interview contains strong language and an open discussion of issues concerning gender and sexuality. Listeners should exercise their own personal discretion as to whether or not to listen to this interview. I'm very, very pleased and honored to be able to have with me on the podcast right now Dr. Jonathan Katz. Jonathan is the co-curator of the exhibition Not Gay, now at the Marion Arts Gallery at SUNY Fredonia. He is associate professor of practice in the history of art, gender, sexuality, and women's studies at the University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and he also co-curated this particular exhibit along with Ryan Patrick Kruger. So after that mouthful, Jonathan, let me welcome you to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Great to have you. So I would like to start off the interview talking a little bit about yourself and your scholarship. You're a very prolific writer, and you've done an awful lot of curating of other exhibits, some of them quite significant, and a lot of them very provocative. So I was wondering if you would sort of give us a background on yourself and, you know, your background in queer studies and sort of how you got into that field.
Sure. So I got into it precisely because when I was a graduate student and looking to work on queer artists like Jasper Johns and Robert Rauschenberg, the notion of sexuality was never auditioned. And I came to quickly realize that despite what was ostensibly a progressive discipline, questions of sexuality were completely off the table. And so I decided to do something about that. And one of the ways that I decided to do it was to write about it and to make a compelling case in the traditional academic world that this needed to be taken seriously. And, so I came of age in a cultural context in which broadly questions of queer representation were being used against us to build and to support the development of a kind of homophobic national politic. And so what I remember mostly in my earliest years is the drumbeat of repression. And that steeled my resolve. And so, in essence, my career has been half as an academic and half as an activist, starting organizations like the Queer Caucus of the College Art Association or the Harvey Milk Institute in San Francisco, or helping to found Queer Nation in San Francisco, all of which are as important to me as my academic work.
So interestingly enough, you've moved into talking about trans art, and I noticed that that's become something that you do lately. And let's sort of jump into that particular aspect of what it is you do. Give us a broad overview of where trans art is these days, because I know that when we get to the exhibition itself at the Marion Art Gallery, we're going to delve more specifically into that.
Yeah, so I got into this, as an historian does, by thinking historically. And what I came to realize is that questions of gender and questions of sexuality are intrinsically connected. After all, to be same-sex implies, right, that you know what sex you are. And what I kept finding is throughout the history of queer culture and in its representations in art, questions of gender play, gender fuck, all sorts of complicated resistances to gender norms were absolutely central. And the question that kept occurring to me is this properly categorized under queer studies, or is this, in fact, the prehistory of trans? And I've never really been able to answer that question, but the fact that I couldn't answer the question made me realize that queer and trans are sharing the same root. And thus what I'm trying to do now is to re-audition transness as part of queerness.
Okay, and it's interesting that you say that, because I find at first I didn't understand the title of the exhibition, Not Gay. I wasn't quite sure what that meant when I first saw it. So then I read your essay in the catalog, and it was interesting to me how you tried to sort of, and you correct me if I'm wrong, please, because I may have misread this, but there's a slight separation for you between queerness and trans, and one is not really the other. They're sort of cousins, and they relate to each other, and sometimes they have arguments, but basically speaking, they're of the same family, but they're not the same, so, and hence not gay.
Yes, and also because what I'm trying to do is to draw a distinction from gayness. When I talk about queerness, I want to be clear, I'm actually not talking about gayness, because what queerness is to me is a refusal of the construction of a binary relationship between, right, gay and straight, or cisgendered and non-cisgendered. What I'm trying to suggest here is that there's a greater fluidity and greater possibility, in part by recognizing that the distinction itself isn't that significant. In other words, what I'm trying to suggest is that I'm working towards a notion of sexuality that's rather like what we think of when we think of a smorgasbord, that you're allowed to take whatever you want. It doesn't make you a better person or worse person to pick up the broccoli or the cauliflower or the herring, right? It's just taste. And it carries no particular predicate. And I'm looking for that world, which I think of as a queer world. And we were sort of hunted into the corner of gayness because of homophobia. But as homophobia begins to dissipate, I think we can come to understand that if we keep calling ourselves gay and marking ourselves off from dominant culture, we'll always be a minority. And I'm interested in a world in which we're the majority and in which a kind of barrierless free play of sexuality and gender is the norm.
Wow. It's interesting. It's just so fascinating to listen here talk about this subject, because I mean, in your writings, you're very it's very dense, and I found I had to read your essay twice in order to be able to absorb all the ideas.
Sorry.
Because oh no, don't apologize. It's just that they're rather fresh to me and expressed in a way that again I am not familiar with, and so I had to grab all the terms and restructure and take a look at that, and I found that actually pretty good. I read another one of your essays I might want to ask you something about, and it was the essay I believe was Why I Hate Diversity, which again, I found to be quite an interesting thing relative to this. You're looking for not diversity and inclusion because they tend to be passive kinds of things, but rather you're looking for the active dialogue where all of these various kinds of identifying factors really come together and meet each other in the same place.
Absolutely. Because what I'm ultimately looking for is I learn so much when someone explains the world to me from their particular perspective, whether that perspective is female, whether it is elderly, whether it is youthful, whether it is black or indigenous or South Asian. I don't care. When I get into a conversation with somebody and I come to understand and to see through their eyes, I learn something. And it seems to me that one of the strategies that queer and trans need to do is to generalize our perspective so that people can see the world through our vision. And it's not just an experiment. It changes how we think. And that is the beginning, it seems to me, of the kind of political progress we need.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I want to share with you my reaction to the exhibit, because one of the things that I really enjoy. I found the exhibit very profound, and I don't use that word very often. And profound in a way I will try to explain as best I can. But again, in your essay, you talk about trans as a process of becoming, not a static thing, but a process of becoming. And I found that looking at the exhibit, the photography that is there, the various models, that I was being allowed to look into a world of which I have very little experience, but it was done in such a personal, such an intimate, and in a lot of cases, what it evoked for me was a very painful way to allow me to view that world from the perspective of the people in the exhibit, and I found that to be, just. I didn't go in there expecting that. I expected to have some sort of objective, you go in and you look at art and it's very objective. But it didn't hit me that way. It hit me in a kind of a very personal way, that these are people who are going through a process, and the process is very profound for them and very meaningful for them. And they were sharing that with me through that. And I couldn't help but commune with that, shall we say.
Yeah, and that pleases me no end, because that's exactly what we were going for. In part because what we're ultimately trying to suggest with this show is that gender isn't natural. It isn't natural in cis people, and it isn't natural in trans people. Gender is always a kind of extant social script, which some of us adhere to perfectly, others of us adhere to largely, and others of us contravene either willingly or unconsciously constantly. And what we're trying to do is to denaturalize the idea that there is such a thing as a gender norm, and instead to open it up to the free play of possibility, which seems to me the state of liberation. And in one of the more interesting aspects of this is the work of a fabulous photographer, very well known in Europe, not well known in the United States, named Della Grace Volcano. And Volcano's masterful. I mean, it's a very strange thing because Volcano gets major museum shows in Europe, and though American born, isn't shown in the United States, which unfortunately says something about the United States.
Yeah, well, yes.
But one of the things that Dell's work constantly does is mix people who are trans through either pharmacological or medical intervention with people who are naturally either femme or butch, and confuse the category. Dell once said to me, I prefer my gender dissidents to be dissident. And that seems to me exactly right. That the idea that you would become a kind of typical man or woman if you were trans is, of course, of very little interest to most trans people. They're much more interested in being somebody who's actively seen as trans, who is, right, female to male, male to female, engaged with the idea that gender is a performance and that they can, without regard to biological sex or chromosomes or whatever it is that you want to claim, that they can be something else. And I should say, just as an aside, researchers have discovered that there are actually, if we take it at the chromosomal level, over 40 genders, which is to say that there are a number of variations, natural variations in gender. In fact, a lot of what we think of as fertility problems are born of these chromosomal issues. So when we think that gender is just, right, binary, we've caricatured the truth of gender.
I think that this particular exhibit, if people go to see it, they might be shocked at first. I mean, I probably have to admit that there might be people who will go in and not get that at all. But if they spend some time really studying those photographs and really just looking at the faces and the bodies and the poses and the way that those photographs are constructed, they might come to find out that there's more to it than just a matter of being offended. They're very personal, and that's why I use the word profound, because they can have a very profound effect on you if you will open yourself up to let them.
Yeah, and I have to say that one of the reasons that I find your response so heartening is that, very sadly, the trans body has become the sort of source of political agitation, the political whipping boy or whipping girl of late. And it's once again the Christian right trying to sort of rip that off and use it to spur donations. And that instrumentalizing of trans people to a larger politics that has nothing to do with them is sickening. And it's happening in Texas, it's happening in Florida, it's happening all over the United States, where there are laws now that prevent children from expressing their own sense of gender. And maybe an exhibition like this can help to build an understanding that gender is much more complicated than we've been led to believe.
Yes, and I hope that's true because, I mean, in a certain way of looking at that's the purpose of art. You can legislate this thing all to hell, but the power of art to be able to move people in a different direction, I think that's where the power of this exhibit comes in.
Exactly.
Jonathan, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. You in doing the research on your work and everything like that. Again, it's all just very fascinating, and I wish you a lot of luck in the rest of your exhibits, the works that you're putting out, that you're currently working on, and hopefully we can get a lot of people to come to see this exhibit at the Marion Art Gallery because it's really quite something. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.
Not Gay will be on display at the Kathy and Jesse Marion Art Gallery in the Rockefeller Art Center until November 12th. Admission is free. Please check the gallery website for gallery hours. And that's it for this pumpkin spice edition of Notes from the Aisle Seat. My thanks to Gail Pugh Dash, Doug DeJoe, and Dr. Jonathan Katz for being my guests on this episode. Notes from the Aisle Seat is a production of the 1891 Fredonia Opera House in Fredonia, New York. For more information on any of the Opera House's events, call the box office at 716-679-1891. Visit the website at www.fredopera.org or email at operahouse@fredopera.org. Notes from the Aisle Seat is now available wherever you get your podcasts and also on the Opera House YouTube channel. If you like this podcast, please consider following us by clicking the follow button on our home website at aisleseat.podbean.com and spreading the word through your social media feeds. If you have an arts event you'd like featured on the podcast, why don't you drop us a line at operahouse@fredopera.org and we'll see about featuring your event. Please try to give us a month's advance notice if possible to facilitate timely scheduling. If you have any suggestions, comments, or criticisms of the podcast, just drop us a line at operahouse@fredopera.org. We'll be glad to receive your feedback. Our next episode will be available on Wednesday, October 11th, 2023. I'm Tom Laughlin, and until then, be safe out there and be kind to one another.